Pro-Vice-Chancellor at the University of Birmingham, and I'm also the Director of City-REDI and WMREDI at the University of Birmingham. I'll mention a few things about that in just a second, but it's fantastic to welcome everyone to this really timely, I think, Creative Industries webinar. We've got a fantastic set of speakers, and I'll introduce the speakers in a moment, and I'll also run through the agenda briefly and tell you what the format is. Just to start off with, to sort of set the scene, the blurb that was sent out and hopefully attracted your interest in this particular webinar was that creative industries can be a catalyst of innovation across all sectors, enabling transformative new products and services which can drive regional economic growth, well-being and quality of life. Now, these statements abound across the policy circles globally and in the UK at the moment, and all of this is true. I think what we want to do today is dig a little deeper underneath some of the predictions and the scenarios and the hype around these sorts of transformations, because there are a number of challenges with predicting these kinds of futures, and particularly the kind of transformation that's going to happen over what timescales, and in particular, what kind of impact these shifts have on places, regional places, particularly in an era where we're interested in levelling up and reducing the inequalities between different regions in the UK and globally. So, past research shows that if new technologies lay at the root of some of these changes, there can be even more hype around, biased predictions from technological determinists that say just because we can create the technology, there's going to be a massive shift, and people get a bit excited about the possibilities, but we misunderstand that these systems are complex, dynamic innovation systems, and things like user adoption and adoption behavior, use patterns, existing business models and existing innovation ecosystems are flexible in certain ways, but they have certain path dependencies. So, what we need to do is understand what barriers and what facilitators there might be to certain types of change. And in this sense, we need to be interdisciplinary. We need to combine an understanding of the technological possibilities with a bit more understanding of the social phenomena and the economic systems. So this is where robust and interdisciplinary research is needed. And you also need engaged research, co-produced with business and with producers and users of technology. And this is where City-REDI, the institute that's hosting this, really focuses our research. We're particularly interested in understanding how the different parts of these systems interact with each other. And we're particularly interested in both the antecedents to certain types of growth at the local level. What are the ingredients, whether it's a particular sector, if it's to do with skills or infrastructure or connectivity, what are the ingredients for particular clusters to evolve? But also, what sort of pathways of growth lead to different types of impact, particularly affecting different beneficiaries through multiplier effects, and the degree to which certain types of growth are inclusive or actually a bit exclusive. So that sort of, sets out in a very brief few sentences the core principles of what we do at City-REDI. Now, we began working with Nesta's Creative Industries program, which is the Policy and Evidence Centre, the PEC, on creative industries, where the hub is at Nesta. We started working with them about 4 years ago, and it was through the work of some excellent work done by Max Nathan, who's at UCL now. And Max brought Tassos on board, and Tassos Kitsos is the core sort of senior researcher at City-REDI, leading on our work on creative industries. So Tassos and I would first of all like to acknowledge and thank the AHRC for funding the work, and also thank Nesta as the sort of PEC hub. And hopefully we'll have one or two people from Nesta and the network for the PEC on the call today. But I'd also like, before I sort of move on to the exam question and the agenda, I particularly want to acknowledge the work and thank Tassos Kitsos. He's the coordinator and organizer of all this work. He's done a superb job in setting up this event. And we'd both also like to thank Stuart Mitchell and Matt Patterson, who've been the staff at City-REDI behind organising the event today. So thanks to all of those people. And I find it much more effective to thank people at the beginning rather than at the end when some people have left the call. So I really want to put those people up front. So On to the agenda and our exam question. The exam question today is very focused on our region, and the core focus of the event is, how can the West Midlands harness the latent potential of creative technology in order to benefit the economy, but also benefit the well-being of citizens, and also enhance our identity, our brand, the perception of the region on the world stage. We've got an excellent lineup. We've got 5 speakers. I'll introduce each of the speakers before they speak, so I'll do that independently. I'm not going to go through all 5 up front, but they're going to take about 8 to 10 minutes each. Some have slides, some don't. What we're going to do is also park all of the questions and the comments and the discussion till the end of the session. So we're going to go through the 5 pretty briskly. I'll be giving them time warnings, but please do go ahead and use the chat line and use the Q&A function, both of which should be available to all the participants and attendees. Pitch your questions out, set out your comments, and what we're going to do is come to those at the end of the session, at the end of the questions. We'll have at least 20 minutes for Q&A and discussion, and you'll get an opportunity to ask in person. Just raise your hand if you want to ask in person, and I'll come to you and we'll unmute you, and you can ask your question, have a discussion. So we're really excited about the interaction and the areas of priority that you put forward as participants. So please do start that as soon as our speakers kick off. Okay, so here we go. So the ordering of the speakers is going to be David Furmage, Lisa DeProprius, Tassos Kitsos, George Windsor, and then Jessica Driscoll. That's all 5. And as I say, I'll introduce them properly before they speak, but we're going to start off today with David Furmage. And David is the Creative and Cultural Senior Policy Lead at the Greater Birmingham and Solihull LEP, the GBSLEP, which are partners in WMREDI. He's also the West Midlands Regional Lead for the creative sector within the context of our local industrial strategy, and he worked quite closely with policy colleagues and placemaking colleagues on this agenda. So he's worked in this area of policy for most of his career, both across Europe and in the region, and as well as with media, the BBC and the ITV. So superb experience. And David's going to start us off today with his talk on the regional agenda. So David, I'm going to hand over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Hello to all. Let's hope we can do some swift screen sharing. I'm hoping you can see that. Some nods. I need a nod. Thanks, Tess. A nod. So you know who I am. And yes, I've been leading the West Midlands Creative Sector Delivery Plan, part of local industrial strategy. So this means that I spend a lot of time developing policy and then designing interventions to deliver on that policy. So in this short presentation, I'll aim to define Careertech, introduce the Careertech 100 to watch, explore its relevance to the region, and then consider some obstacles to implementation of a Careertech growth strategy for the region. Careertech is a newly labelled creative sector, but not a new concept. We have for a very long time recognised the power of creativity and tech to drive cross-sector innovation, and we've seen the creative sector as an enabler of growth across all sectors for many, many years. So some definitions, I'll pull these are sort of direct quotes from various sort of websites, articles. So Createch is the intersection of creativity and technology. It's about the co-creation of new tech products and services for creative outputs, processes, products and services. And it brings together creative skills and emerging technologies to create new ways of engaging audiences to inspire business growth and investment. Createch is used to describe new tech that seeks to improve and automate the delivery and use of creative services. And the Creative Industry Council, which is as we coined this term, says in what I think is perhaps a slightly clumsy quote, Createch is utilised to support both companies and consumers to better manage their operations and processes by applying specialised software and algorithms that are used on computers, smartphones, consoles, and other Internet of Things devices. Interesting quote. And the CSC go on to just add what sectors are falling within Createch, and that is design, crafts, music, museums, fashion, film, TV, radio, audio, music and entertainment, esports, marketing tech, architecture, augmented reality, virtual reality, gaming, and media. So some of these are usual suspects there, perhaps. To promote and establish the term Createch to the world, the CSE has run an annual competition in the last couple of years, the Createch Ones to Watch Showcase, and the applications for this year close on the 25th of June. I'll put the link on screen, and I'm sure we can send it around as well. And their selection criteria are actually interesting. So they look for the surprise factor, the purpose factor, the disruptive factor, cross-sectoral impact and or opportunity for global collaboration, and of course, some commercial impact. So why does getting involved in Createch matter for the region then? Well, as we know, the West Midlands already has a significant creative cluster with strengths in games, design, marketing, crafts like jewelry, esports, and emerging strengths in multi-platform storytelling, such as where VR, screen, and theatre come together. Growing the sector means building on these strengths and then leveraging opportunities like our major events, 5G, and our renaissance in TV and film production. And then Createch matters to the region because getting our businesses involved will put the region on the national map, stimulate new investment, and drive growth across all sectors. So what might be standing in the way of our region really adopting Createch as its own? I think one stumbling block is perhaps the word itself, as it does grate slightly. Createch is not as crisp as, say, fintech, and it's a little woolly too, perhaps. So where does Createch begin and end? It seems to be trying to cover everything that is new and shiny in the creative and tech world. And surely we aren't going to suddenly call the entire games industry Createch instead of games. The first CSC and Createch report seems to be focused on the very largest VC-backed companies. Now, brilliant as they are, to gain traction, it must also resonate with much smaller and emerging creative businesses too. On the positive side, and there are many, government, businesses, and consumers like to get behind the latest thing, and Createch could well be that. The government, in their Build Back Better plan for growth, promote new innovation as a key driver for the UK economy. Now, for those of us who have been involved in policy making for some time, policies are rarely new; they're almost always recycled. But things have to look new, so it's important for government and stakeholders to believe that things are new, so the words get changed. And so I think Createch is arriving at the right time. Government wants some new policy ideas around innovation, and Createch can provide it. It will be an opportunity for the West Midlands to access public money, to really build an advantage in Createch, and use this to leverage our current opportunities, e.g. Commonwealth Games, and get a long-term advantage. In conclusion, so the overall question was, how do we harness Createch in order to benefit the economy, well-being of our citizens and the region's perception on the world stage? My take on that question is, so what I'm asking everyone is, so what are the practical interventions we need to make Monday morning? So what do we actually do Monday morning to move the dial on Createch's impact across our region and ensure it provides a lasting economic and social impact? And that just leaves me to say, may the Createch be with you, and thanks for listening, and over to others. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. So some really good starting points to steer us between visions and practical applications and meaningful interventions. So super. So again, put comments and questions on the chat line. We're going to move straight on to our next speaker, Professor Lisa de Procris is a Professor of Regional Economic Development in the Birmingham Business School, and is actually a really long-term associate and friend of City-REDI, and a fantastic academic. She's got expertise in Industry 4.0 and technological change, and a really deep understanding of service industry clusters and districts and regional economic development. She's recently completed a Horizon 2020 project called Makers on Industry 4.0, and I think it's fair to call her one of the world experts in this area. So thank you very much for coming on and doing this for us, Lisa, and I'll hand over to you now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Simon, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think what David just said it fits very well what I'm trying to say now. I have 3 points that I want to get across. First of all, I want to talk about how big is the change that we are talking about. Secondly, what are the opportunities that this will raise? And then which are the challenges? I think Createch is the big change. These sectors represent the core of what we call the digital revolution. Industry 4.0 is it's a broader term. Even a broader term would be the fourth industrial revolution. Many people would argue that we are at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution with a wave of new technologies coming to fruition. These technologies are, of course, linked to digital technologies, and that's where Createch really fits in. Having said that, I just want to mention that we need to also think about this change as bigger than technological change. And what I mean by that is it has to have a green angle. We must really think about digital technology and sustainable technologies to enable us over the next 10, 20, 30 years to recombine growth with sustainability, which has been decoupled in the last 30 years. So we have a really big challenge that we are facing as a society, as an economy, and I think these are real times of real change. Now, as I said, this change really has huge opportunities, and Createch, the way I see them, and the way they were defined, they're really the engine of this change. They will change the nature of industries, and in doing so, they will change the nature of products. Already we see this happening in so many cases, and this, in particular, manufacturing products being completely transformed by the integration of digital technologies within them. So new processes also will matter. Lots of people, compare Industry 4.0 with a wild automation within, like light out factories where there's no labor, there are no people, just a lot of robots working as one. These, of course, will happen. So there will be changes in the process of production. So the manufacturing sector will fundamentally change. But another big change will be in the products that it delivers, which will be this product will be increasingly less manufacturing and more hybrid. So much they are intertwined and dovetail with digital technologies. Now, new products, new services, new industries, of course, this means new markets. And we need to think about how we as consumers will approach this, because all this massive change has to be embraced by consumers really thinking and moving beyond their comfort zone and trying new products. There'll be new kind of niches which will emerge. And of course, the big test will be to which extent these new niches will become mass productions. So this second point is these opportunities which are emerging, and I do believe that Createch have play the role of really moving these opportunities forward. And of course, what it also means is that these industries, because they are the engine of change, they have to signal to the average manufacturing firm, for example, in the Midlands, what difference they can make to them. And this is a big responsibility, because very often there is almost like a separation between tech stuff and manufacturing activities, especially in small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, the digital sector has altogether the big responsibility of telling or making aware businesses of what they can do and what difference their digital products or services can do to their business. Otherwise, there will be this kind of decoupling will unfortunately damage manufacturing framework, which will be will remain adopters of an old technology. They will become obsolete because they will not have embraced the new technologies. And this brings me to my third point, which is about transversal challenges. I can see three major transversal challenges that businesses are facing, small and medium more than larger firms. First of all, we are going through a transition now, and managing this transition will be crucial for businesses to somehow survive. The transition is, first of all, in terms of investing. Capital investments in new machinery, new technology will be very important. These new technologies are expensive, they're risky. Firms need to be helped in the process of choosing which of these technologies they need to make this jump into Industry 4.0. And of course, it also means supporting them financially, creating incentives for adopting new technologies. These new technologies go hand in hand with the emergence of new skills. And again, businesses will do some, but these new skills we can't expect businesses to create a new skilled labor force. This is where policy is very important. And I do believe that policy at the regional level or at the city level is going to be crucial, because of course, every region would have a different industrial makeup, and therefore different skills will be required. Now, I talked at the very beginning about new sectors, new industries, and therefore this will bring new supply chains. The way in which industries will change will also force firms to redesign their supply chain, find new partners, find new collaborations, and altogether really rethink completely the way they organize their production externally, as well as internally through the adoption of new capital investments. So managing transition is the first big challenge. Costly, expensive. Firms like to remain in their cozy, friendly environment, but they need to really open up to change. And this, of course, is a big thing. The second transversal challenge I would like to mention is how somehow, because we are at times where products life cycle is very short, technological adoption is very fast and very quick, we are seeing already a recoupling of production and innovation. In other words, we can't anymore have production in, for example, in lower cost economies and R&D labs, for example, in higher cost economies. We see a recoupling of innovation activities with production activities. Why? Because the production is constantly changing. It's changing too fast to be decoupled, both in terms of organization, but also spatially. So we see a co-location, increasing co-location between innovation and production. Finally, if markets are changing, we of course firms need to significantly invest in thinking about how to connect with consumers. The idea of selling a product once and for all, it will become obsolete very soon. Increasingly, firms will be looking for more sophisticated, more complex solutions for a long-term relationship with their customers. Servitization, which was mentioned already, is one example of that. So I will just conclude by saying that 3 points: big change, big opportunities, but also big challenges. And the way how firms will adopt new technologies, will adapt to the change, will very much determine the way in which they will be able to survive to these transformations. Thank you.
Excellent, Lisa. Thank you very much. Really clear. I mean, I think what we might like to come back to, and if there are comments and questions about this problem of getting small firms who are at the bottom of the productivity lag in the UK and frankly have a track record of not investing in capital or training, whether their financial incentives or programs really are going to help boost their use of this new technology is a critical question for our region in particular. So some super points there from Lisa. Our third speaker is Tassos Kitsos. He's a research fellow at City-REDI. He's been with us for a long time and is our lead actually on the cultural and creative sector. So he's been a member of this multi-institutional PEC network for some time, looking at the local impact of creative industries. He's a regional economist and he specializes in resilience, you know, how regional economies can be more or less resilient to shocks. And also we've been studying with Tassos the regional impacts of universities and how they contribute to, in particular, areas of technology and skills for local economic growth. So Tassos, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully you see the right screen and not my notes. Thank you and hello to everyone. insight I will bring into the discussion, and I'll try to keep up with the excellent presentations we had so far, is around creative industries' economic impacts. And this is work that I've been involved in with other researchers, Diana Gutierrez Posada, Max Nathan, and Massimiliano Nuccio, in a project from the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center and City-REDI around the spillover effects of creative industries. So one of the issues we have at the moment is that we don't know the exact impact of Createch on local economies. So the instance I'm bringing is from the creative industries as a whole, and hopefully this will give us kind of a minimum threshold of what to expect when we say we want to grow the creative industries in the area. Before I continue, I need to show you this disclaimer. That's because in the study I will be discussing, we use ONS microdata from the Secure Data Service, and the results have been cleared for disclosure, but this does not mean the ONS endorses any of our analysis. So all mistakes are still with us. Right, so in terms of looking at the impact of creative industries, a very good point to start from is this PEC evidence review from researchers at Sussex Business School. They look into 355 articles in academic journals, and they see an increase in papers over the recent years, which suggests that academia is starting to pick up on the idea that creative industries can play a significant role in local economies. But also at the same time, they identify a range of improvements and gaps, if you want. That's around the important things that we start discussing in this meeting around policy engagement, robust comparative analysis, knowing more detail and more nuance of what mechanisms are involved. Thankfully, they also provide a range of steps for further research. So they discuss that we need to know more around the economic contribution and the causal links from creative industries to the rest of the economies. We need more quantitative approaches, more comparative approaches, more sectoral analysis within what we call creative industries, for example, the Createch part of it, and also to look at specific policy instruments. And I have underlined there the aspects that our research at the moment contributes to. So when we think of the economic impacts of creative industries, there is 4 potential sources of these impacts. The first is multiplier effects from creative workers. Imagine people working at IT or film industry, etc., on local services. That's restaurants, pubs, hairdressers, or retail, and so on. The second source is amenity effects. Imagine galleries or museums attracting high-income residents and visitors to an area who go on and spend money in restaurants, creating employment and further growth in an area. The third is the effect of creative industries on other industries, so increasing the stock of ideas in an area and improving its innovation and hence productivity that can raise living standards in an area. And finally, there is effects that we still should be aware they exist. So there are displacement effects, negative effects, at least at the short term, on other industries. So increasing creative industries in an area may mean input competition, so more competition for labor or increasing in rents and so on. That can drive some industries away. Whether this is part of the normal transformation or a significantly negative effect is still up for discussion. Now, in terms of the quantitative evidence, there is, as I said at the beginning, there is scant evidence on the hardcore impacts of creative industries. There is some evidence of a connection between creative industries jobs and gross domestic product per capita. This is a study on EU regions that says that an increase of 1% in creative industry jobs can increase GDP per capita by 0.4%. But there is also studies that suggest that these are kind of a virtuous cycle. So more industries, more creative industries are concentrated in areas with high GDP per capita, further raising GDP per capita. So it's difficult to find a causal link. There is also some evidence that employment in creative service industries increases labor productivity, and even more interestingly, this piece of research suggests that it increases productivity not only for the region that has the creative service industries, but also for the neighboring ones. So it's quite an interesting aspect of spatial spillovers in this sense. And there is also research that suggests that the simultaneous concurrence of creative industries and STEM workers is associated with high innovation growth in US cities. So slowly we see an increase in evidence on the actual economic contribution of creative industries. What we haven't seen yet is employment multipliers, so the effect of creative industries on employment locally. And there's been 2-3 studies I mentioned there that they haven't identified a direct causal link on this. This is exactly where we come in, and we look at all of the creative industries, the whole definition from DCMS, from advertising and marketing to architecture, libraries and museums and so on, in urban travel to work areas using very detailed ONS data from the business structure database. So this allows us to look at 22 years of creative industries evolution over time, which is one of the largest time horizons we could look at. We use a causal research design, and I can bore you to sleep with the details of that, but I won't. And we are also able to separate between arts and creative services. When I talk about creative services, is more heavily involved industries in Createch, let's say. And finally, we identify local multipliers for jobs and businesses in non-tradables, such as local services, and tradables, such as manufacturing, before and after 2007. Now, in terms of our results, we have found that creative industries increasingly concentrate in few cities over these 22 years. So we need to be mindful when we discuss aspects of leveling up and so on. There is an increasing clustering in specific cities. We also find that each creative industry job generates at least 2 jobs in local services, and that's on average, and that's also the creative industry jobs as the whole sector. So if we're thinking about Createch, we are thinking this as a very lower bound of the estimates of the impact that Createch can have in local services. We find that this effect comes in jobs rather than workplaces. So we have companies getting bigger rather than more companies in local services. And we also find suggestive evidence, it's not conclusive, that these effects are driven mainly from creative workers spending. So from the 4 channels, this is the first where creative workers spend money in local services rather than the urban amenities channel. Interestingly, and especially with my background on economic resilience, we find that these effects decline after 2007, and looking further into this and why it's happening is quite an interesting avenue for future research. And we also don't find an impact on tradable activity, on things like manufacturing. And we think that this is probably because positive and negative effects kind of cancel each other. So we have the positive effects on innovation, productivity on manufacturing, and at the same time, we have the negative effects of crowding out and input competition. This is a end of my presentation, there is a working paper I have available and able to send to anyone that is interested. And there is far more detail on the methods and the way we're calculating this. And of course, I'm more than happy to discuss later on. Thank you very much.
Tassos, thank you very much. Very clear. And as ever, research leads to more questions sometimes and puzzles. So thanks very much. For anyone who's not, who joined us after the beginning, just to note that we will be taking questions and having a discussion after all the speakers have finished. And we've got 2 more speakers in our session today. And our next speaker is George Windsor, Dr. George Windsor. He's the Head of Insights at Tech Nation. He was formerly at Nesta and also a researcher looking at migration and entrepreneurship at Loughborough University. Now his role is to support entrepreneurs to accelerate growth. So he provides with his team new data and evidence for decision making, and he's produced the Tech Nation report and some jobs and skills reports and the scale ratio. So he'll tell us more about that, and I'll hand over to George. He does apologise, however, that he cannot stay on after his presentation. I'm sure he'll take questions by emails, but he won't be here to join in the discussion, unfortunately. Over to you, George.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Simon. And yeah, just to echo that, apologies, I won't be able to stay, but would love to have a discussion with you about the research that we're doing and the research that we're yet to do. One of the things that I'm going to talk about today is what next, really, and to build on. Very grateful to David for putting in the chat the link to our latest report and to build on that research, because that is really just a very first step on trying to identify some of the, as David said, some of the overarching, very high-level trends in a very discrete area, which is VC investment into Createch companies. So again, I would like to make 3 points in my presentation, but I'm also going to talk around some of the findings from our recent report that we did for the Creative Industries Council. And we know that the UK has long been renowned as a shining light when it comes to global tech. And we've conducted the Tech Nation report over the last 7 years. That strength is only growing. Equally, in my work at Nesta, and in, I mean, we've heard about the range of different research that is going on to really prove the fact that the UK is seen as a preeminent creative force in the world too, and it's having profound benefits across nations and regions in the UK. And as David said, creativity and technology have never been inextricable. Createch isn't in itself a new thing, but what it does is represents a number of threads of real acute economic change and evolution, in fact. And I think the pace of change is really accelerating. It also dovetails, and hence why I reference some of the stuff that we've done as Tech Nation, it dovetails with the real sort of burgeoning growth of deep and emerging technology. And I think where we are seeing most of the sort of some of the really interesting things in Createch actually is that sort of interface between deep and emerging technology and creativity. And I'll come on to talk about that in just a second. So I think it's fair to say that our understanding of Createch and the extent to which we have a shared view of what Createch is still quite embryonic, and it's still fairly limited. And I think we're still exploring this field. So it's wonderful to be able to talk about it today and really discuss what this could potentially be going forward. But that understanding is rapidly growing. And as mentioned, we're going to be extending the research that we've done around Createch on the investment side of things and really looking a lot deeper into jobs and skills. The point that Lisa made, very much thinking about what are the implications and what change is going to be driven in the labour market as a result of this industrial change and vice versa. How are jobs and skills and new applications of skills to certain industrial areas going to drive further industrial change? So that's the second point, really. Our understanding is to be fleshed out. The third point, and this is where I'm going to spend a little bit more time, is that Createch, we found, really represents a fundamental opportunity for broad-based growth in the UK, and in fact across many other economies, but we've focused here on the UK. We, in our report looking at the intersection of creativity and technology, focused in on just one part of it, as mentioned, VC investment. And we know that that's not the whole picture, far from it, in fact. We know that it represents a certain set of indicators that actually, from a policy perspective, are really quite useful to look at, because they're very clear-cut and it's very apparent the sort of levels of investment into certain companies and what that means in terms of the sort of growth prospects for those companies. It also is something, I guess, that ties into this idea of the sort of the hype cycle that we were talking about. In terms of what we actually found in our preliminary piece of research, looking at VC investment, we saw that Createch companies in the UK raised nearly £1 billion in VC investment in 2020. And that was a 22% increase from 2019. Bearing in mind the year that we had and the immense disruption that was caused to the creative industries, in fact, we think that that is a very positive thing. It illustrates the resilience of this hybridized area of economic activity, perhaps over and above some other areas of the UK economy. From a global perspective, we saw that the UK was third in the world for Createch VC investment, behind just the US and China. And that's sort of interesting. But what's more interesting is that Createch investment actually constituted over 9% of total tech sector investment in 2020. It represented 9% of all investment that went into the UK tech sector, compared to 6% in the US and China, respectively. In essence, Createch represents a slightly more significant proportion of overall tech investment compared to other countries. And again, you might say, well, I'm not surprised about that. We know that the creative industries and actually the intersection between creativity and tech has long been important for the UK and has long been something that has been a real shining light for the nation. We saw that Createch companies actually raised more VC investment than energy tech companies that have received an awful lot of publicity around it. You think about some of the companies like Octopus Energy and Tokamak and others that are really at the very cutting edge when it comes to areas like net zero, clean tech, green tech. I think this comparison is one that needs to be taken further, and actually it ties into Lisa's point. It mustn't be a comparison and we mustn't pit Createch against these other sectors. Rather, I think Createch is going to be a driving force within many of these areas of activity, as well as representative of almost an umbrella of activity in its own right. And that's really what we're coming on to talk about in the next part of our research that we're currently working on. And we're able to explore that through the lens of jobs and skills, as well as then exploring that with stakeholders to understand where they feel opportunities and challenges exist. So as well as thinking about Createch as this burgeoning area of activity that is at the interface of creativity and tech, we also need to see it as a driving force within companies. Tech companies, other companies across the economy alike, are going to be impacted by the interface between creativity and technology in various guises. And I think one of the most interesting ways to look at that is thinking about new roles that are inherently combining creative and technical skills, new functions within businesses that are inherently combining creative workers and tech workers, new collaborations between businesses, creative and tech, combining their efforts to really pioneer new products and services, or in fact, functions between different businesses that again achieve that symbiosis of creativity and tech. And that's really what we're coming on to explore. One of the areas that was of real interest in the report that we recently published was that artificial intelligence and machine learning based Createch companies received the highest proportion of Createch VC investment in 2020, with about half of that VC investment figure of $1 billion raised by these firms. And I think this is an area, again, that I think needs further exploration. Your question or your point about research raising further questions is quite right. And I think we're probably all glad of it on this panel, given the nature of what we do. But I think that it's something that is going to be incredibly interesting over the next 5 years, particularly given a broader movement around how we put the right mechanisms in place to support deep tech, to support net zero tech companies, to help us tackle some of the world's greatest challenges. I think as part of that puzzle, we're necessarily going to see Createch forming a very important part of the solution. So that's it really from me. Just a brief recap. So those points are, Createch isn't new, but actually it represents an ever increasingly important change within the economy. Our understanding is limited, but it's growing. And we look forward to working with many colleagues to really push the margins of what we understand about Createch. And finally, Createch represents a growth opportunity in the UK, and one that could allow for broad-based growth right across our nations and regions. So thank you very much for your time today. And again, apologies I have to jump off, but please do ask questions in the chat, of course, and I can pick those up later with you. And I'm very happy to be contacted by email. So thank you.
Many thanks, George. Super. And we'll pick up the chat and pass things on to you as appropriate. So we have one more speaker to go. Remember, I've got one or two hands up, but please do post your questions and your comments, and we'll pick those up after our final speaker. Final speaker's Jessica Driscoll, who's the head of immersive technology at the Digital Catapult. I'm sure she'll tell us what immersive technology is, but I understand it's to do with virtual, augmented and mixed reality, as well as a particular focus on the human-computer interface. So she's actually got great experience working in more applied areas in this area of technology in a variety of sectors, but also a background working for BBC R&D. So it's great to have Jessica with us, and I'll hand over to you, Jessica, for your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Simon, and also thank you very much for inviting me today. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. Let's see if that works. Always slightly nervous doing that. And try to get the presentation up. Please bear with me for one moment. Okay, so I think that what's come before today has been really, really good to kind of set the scene in a wider context. And today I'm going to talk about some specific examples of Createch and the work the Digital Catapult and beyond have been doing. So I'm going to talk about some specific examples, talk about some trends that we've been seeing with Createch and also supported Createch, and also some ideas about what Createch might need moving forwards. So just very, very briefly, a quick introduction to Digital Catapult. So our mission is to accelerate the early adoption of advanced digital technologies in the UK. And Simon is completely right. By immersive, we mean virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, haptics, and more newly virtual production, which I'm going to be touching on in a moment. But we do this by working in a few tech areas. So future networks, immersive technologies, which I look after, artificial intelligence, and distributed systems. So George and several other colleagues also mentioned this cross-tech and deep tech application, and that's definitely what we're seeing at Digital Catapult, and with everyone else we talk to, the combination and the convergence of all of those technologies. So that's worth remembering, I think, throughout all of the discussion. We do this by building and operating physical and digital facilities. So we've got a network of immersive labs around the country. We design and deliver innovation programs. The two programs that I look after are called Creative XR and Augmentor, one a creative content accelerator, and the other one an early stage business support for immersive businesses. We convene and collaborate on research and development, and we also work commercially to create early proof of concepts with SMEs and larger corporates. So I talked a little bit about Creative XR. This is an accelerator that we run in collaboration with Arts Council England, and we provide cascade funding for production companies to really experiment and de-risk the process of creative innovation using XR technologies. We give 20 companies £20,000 and then we help them over 12 weeks to create these experiences. And then after that, 3 or 4 of the companies will go on to receive a larger sum of money to complete their prototypes. But what comes before that is the Creative XR showcase and market. So those applications and new content that has been created locally really gets a national and an international stage on which to get further investment. So we've had a really great homegrown project. I'll just skip to that one here. This was called Beholder, that was created by Birmingham Open Media. This was in our first year of Creative XR. And this was supported by Digital Catapult, Arts Council, and also Birmingham Open Media, a fantastic exploration of beauty and autism, and a really great first edition to the Creative XR cohort. And there's also another fantastic homegrown West Midlands company that I was lucky enough to work with previous to coming to Digital Catapult, called Cornerstone VR. So again, the convergence of Createch and children and adult services. They provide VR training, 360 experiences, which puts you in the shoes of a child, engendering empathy, and they've done some fantastic research on behaviour change. One of the first pilots that I ever went to was actually in Coventry. And again, a great example of Createch being created in the West Midlands and then scaling throughout the country. And also in a very, very low tech area, something like children's services where VR and AR have not generally been used, but they did this very, very successfully. And the business model that they created, the initial funding for this was government funding, but then they managed to get private investment and scale it commercially. So a fantastic example of something created locally that scaled nationally. And another example I'd like to talk about that came out of Creative XR is a project that we did with the Munch Museum. So this is an augmented reality application to help children from 8 years old to 11 years old in the Norwegian school system engage with the work of Edvard Munch. The reason why I mention this again is that the Munch team came to the Creative XR showcase, wanted to adapt this method of innovation and de-risking, creating something before they scaled it into a nationwide pilot. And that's something I think that we're really missing in our Createch. We create fantastic things locally, but we aren't able to scale them nationally. And we definitely need commitment, framework, and people to help that process happen. So we were really thrilled to be able to do that, but it was a shame it was in Norway and not here in the UK. So hopefully we'll be able to replicate that. But that has been a very interesting and challenging product to work on, because we did it all remotely, and user testing remotely with Norwegian children was no easy task. But continuing that theme of, really showcasing things internationally, we've also been working on a project called the Immersive Arcade in conjunction with UKRI for the Audience of the Future programme, because so much amazing immersive content has been created in the UK over the last 20 years, but very few people have seen this content because it's been in a museum or a gallery or a festival. And the Audience of the Future team really wanted to bring that content to life again for people and have that shown internationally. So this is going to be running until September. There are 4 volumes. So again, another opportunity for regional content, especially created in somewhere like the West Midlands, to be part of a showcase like this, and again, get more exposure to their work, which would hopefully lead to more funding, more jobs, and more skills. So I mentioned a little bit earlier virtual production. So I think everybody's already aware of this coming disruption. I think, in fact, we have already been disrupted with game engines and virtual production techniques. So things like Unreal and Unity, they're already saving people money and content creators. So you can create a piece of content once and use it across multiple channels. Virtualization, AI, cloud compute, and 5G, they're already accelerating our digital workflows. This is for some people, not here yet, but for some people already happening. But some of those traditional craft skills, which the UK is really renowned for, i.e. in post-production, they might be threatened. So what is it that policy needs to do? What kind of infrastructure and facilities and training do we need to give people to make sure that we remain at the forefront of these creative industries? And I think one of those things is trying to cope with this convergence. When I started my career, a creative technologist didn't exist, but now that's on many, many job boards. And now the role of virtual production supervisor is a very, very new role, but a role that's very much in demand, but we can't keep up. Our talent pipeline isn't fast enough to cope with these new roles. So what we're doing in response to this, Digital Catapult is setting up a virtual production test stage. And we think it's the first R&D facility that's completely dedicated to virtual production. And what we're going to do is try to disseminate those learnings and also link up with other virtual production stages around the country. For example, hopefully we'll be able to disseminate that to places like Steamhouse, who are already in our virtual network of labs and hubs. But wouldn't it be great if Steamhouse also had a virtual production facility, so people wouldn't have to travel to London to do this learning and this research and development, and then the local universities and the local ecosystem could make use of that facility. So I think slowly that's happening, but in the meanwhile, we will try to disseminate all of these learnings and give people an opportunity to reach the facilities, but also an opportunity to get hold of data, because doing research in production is very, very difficult in commercial applications, because the ILMs of the world and the Disneys don't want to give any data to anyone, but that's really essential if you're doing research into virtual production. So some trends that we've spotted, I've already talked a little bit about virtual production and immersive techniques being used in tools in the content production pipeline, cross-technology applications. So it isn't, we don't really ever talk about VR on its own anymore. It's always with AI-powered characters, or powered by 5G, or in conjunction with supply chain. All of those cross-technology applications are becoming much more sought after, but it's still quite difficult sometimes to implement those because work is still rather siloed. So again, how can we provide opportunities for people to meet, to get their hands on the technology, to understand the benefits? Sharing infrastructure, we've seen this so much during the last year, especially with the pandemic. For example, Cannes XR, the New Images Festival, and Tribeca XR Festival. Last year, they all had their own virtual festivals to mitigate against the pandemic, because people couldn't come and see VR face to face. This year, they're sharing that infrastructure to reduce cost and also sustainability, to reduce carbon impact of creating that virtual environment again. And that's another really important factor of creating these virtual production studios. There hasn't been enough research yet as to, is it really more sustainable to shoot using big LED screens, or is it more sustainable to fly everybody to Morocco? You know, what is the carbon footprint? What is that impact? We definitely need more evidence if we're going to successfully promote that, and also, get proper funding to do sustainable projects. Another impact, another trend that we've seen is the shift from smaller pots of funding, and I speak solely for immersive in this case, but small grants of £5,000 or £10,000 to create early stage products, moving to larger pots of funding and challenge-led collaborations. For example, Story Futures Academy with their China and National Gallery collaboration, the UK and Canada collaboration for co-productions, much larger pots of funding. And I think because those companies then can help to reach international audiences, and they can do something that's a little bit further on and not just a prototype that they need to reach out to many other people to get funding for. Hopefully that will help to scale quicker. We've also been doing some work with UK and India for an immersive sustainability working group. So hopefully that will become further funded to again create some proof of concepts to prove out sustainability in immersive. And also the increasing convergence of manufacturing in the creative industries. Last year, we did some work with Resilient XR. This was a consortium put together of creative industries companies that had never worked in medtech before, but they created lots of volumetric capture assets to use on HoloLens to train doctors for remote support. They worked with Leeds University and the Nightingale Hospital, all in response to COVID impact. So again, it was very interesting to see these creative companies all responding to a different vertical that they'd never worked in before. And I think that we'll see that happening more and more. So just to round off, what does Createch need? It needs lots of things, evidently, but I think that it needs high-tech infrastructure to enable distributed production and increase the opportunities nationwide. So, there should be a virtual production facility in every major city to enable, better network productions and to help crystallize those skills. I think that even though training regionally is incredibly important. It would be fantastic to invest in national skills programs so everybody has a parity of these new skills, and also to respond to new technology and rapidly evolving workflows. I think we need increased R&D, interoperability, and work on open standards, especially in immersive, because we are still very behind in standardization for hardware and software. Enabling the creation of new business models and formats for production, and also creating regionally and piloting on a nationwide scale. It would be wonderful to see pilots of virtual reality in education, or AR in training, or in manufacturing. And I think that the high value manufacturing Catapult have been working on a national skills program for manufacturing. So it would be fantastic to see that in Createch or in production. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I know I absolutely galloped through that and there was a lot of information, but I've always got a lot of things to share. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Jessica, fantastic. Thank you very much. And in fact, one of my questions we might come back to is how do we bridge vision and the adoption? And some of those demonstration examples were fantastic, in terms of demonstrating the real applied sort of breakthroughs that the technology can enable. So I might come back to the panel with that particular question, but I'm going to start. I've got a hand up and I've got an anonymous question I'll read, but I'll start with the hand up. It's been up for a while. I don't know what the question is, but I'm going to go to Mark HW to kick us off. Mark, you should be able to talk. If you can't, one of our colleagues will let you. Can you speak? No. Can Matt or Tassos allow Mark HW to speak?
Yeah, if Mark can unmute, he should be able to speak now.
I'm assuming Mark's still on the call. Let's come back to Mark if we can, then. I'll go to an anonymous attendee. So I don't know who this is, but this is probably kicking off with Jessica, actually, given the practical demonstrations and the BCU Steamhouse she put through. This is really applied. This person's a musician, interested in creating a VR immersive and interactive experience, and has a whole plan and a storyboard, but is struggling to find funding. Music funders apparently don't provide funding for equipment. Where can this person go? And that is practical, but actually does bridge the vision and what people can do to get into this. So have you got a response to that, Jessica?
Yes, I have. So anonymous attendee, hello. I think that we can introduce you definitely to the Steamhouse in Birmingham. We can also introduce you to the technicians at our Immersive Lab. We can make you aware of the Creative XR program, and we can also help you to look for local funding opportunities. But I think in the first place, if you could get in somewhere and experiment with some equipment and meet some technologists, you'd probably have a really good idea and further crystallize what you would want to do, and they would be able to help you then outreach. So please do contact me directly. I'll put my email into the chat for you.
Perfect. Okay, that's super. We have another question. I'm just trying to see if it's along the same lines. It's quite an intriguing question. I've got no idea who to ask this, but it says, what are the land-based implications of Createch, i.e. how much space will the Createch sector need, and where will it go? Where are these clusters likely to grow? So I guess, maybe to do with all sorts of things to do with land prices and, the clusters barriers in terms of real property prices, I guess. But let's go to Lisa and then David on that, just straight off the top of my head, because it's an interesting question.
A very interesting question. Usually digital firms tend to be located in cities. They don't need a lot of physical space, although of course some do. For example, in augmented reality, when you start looking at much bigger much bigger products, but usually they tend to develop near urban centers. So I think that's where, and also that's some of the finding that Taz was presenting in terms of the importance of urban spaces. And that's all I really could contribute.
Super. David, you have a comeback, and then I've clicked on Peter Murphy because that's the next question coming up.
No,
David?
Not especially really, because I think we're really looking at how we evolve this sector, and at the moment it's not really about space, it's about how it sort of develops. So sorry, nothing to add.
Okay. One of the interesting questions about, and it may not really answer this, but in a sense, one of the questions for people like us is how much of this is going to be physically clustered? How much does proximity matter? And how much do firms need to be co-located in a sort of traditional cluster, potentially around universities, versus actually whether this is a particular sector which growth will be based on, networks that are global networks of experts that have differentiators that connect to each other. And I don't know the answer to that, but it seems to have implications for the land issue. So no, thank you very much for the question. And that was an anonymous attendee. On to Petter Murphy, and I should allowed you, I think, to be able to ask this question yourself, if you're okay to do that, Petter. Do you want to go ahead?
Fine. It's Peter, but don't worry.
Sorry, Peter. Apologies.
No, everybody does it. So it's Peter Murphy from Coventry University. And it was a question for Jessica, really. Are there any initiatives where you're going to almost creative industry speed date across sectors to foster that collaboration?
Yes, so Digital Catapult hold a number of events as part of our programs and our outreach to facilitate that cross-sectoral collaboration. And there's an open call live at the moment, actually, with the 5G test bed. I'm going to put in the chat here. It's about construction and AR and 5G. So I have a look at that. And I can also direct you to the next set of networking events that we'll be doing. So I will, if you pop me your email, I can liaise with you directly.
Thank you.
I mean, the question does prompt a sort of follow-on question. And I'm going to ask David this and then come to Lisa. We saw some demonstration effects, but what are the really on-the-ground facilitators, David, for the GBSLEP to, promote a translation of vision into practical applications that are going to scale up and grow? And secondly, just give us a bit of an indication of how the GBSLEP would sort of select and privilege or prioritize certain projects above others if there's subsidized funding or investments to go through the LEP into things that will make a difference to the region, if you see what I mean. Have you got examples of that?
Yes, thanks, Simon. We're certainly focused on the high growth opportunities. One of our first ones has been around the screen sector. So certainly virtual production is an area where we have a number of local operators looking at setting up facilities here. Of course, Stephen Knight Studios and things like that. So we're just co-invested in a £18 million creative content hub here. So we're very focused on having that sort of thought leadership edge. We really want to have the actual Midlands as a clear focus with real practical things happening. So certainly having virtual production here, having esports, all of these things, they're all being developed. They are here, and we're building on that, And I think one of the things about this, as I've said, I think because Createch isn't, in a sense, it's not new. It's rebadging something, but I think the opportunity with rebadging is money. It'll make businesses notice, others notice. So the ears are sort of pricked up, and it means that we are, I think, able to bid for more things. So I think that's, for me, it isn't that we're suddenly doing something completely different than we were before. It enables us to be more focused and to almost get more for the region, because we do want to be a really strong base here.
So inward investment, jobs, more firms getting involved, more people impacted. That's the sort of success factors that you'd be looking at.
Yeah.
Excellent. Lisa, let me translate that if I can, just to bring you on. And I'm giving Bruce Tether a bit of a heads up because I know he's on the call and he's part of the PEC network, and it'd be great to hear from him in a second. But Lisa, you talk about firms, and there are some challenges, I guess, for firms. There's a lot of complex transitions in terms of skills, combinations of expertise and skills, but also in terms of value chains and where they locate bits of their activity, as you were saying, because of the connection between, manufacturing and production being closer to where the innovation's happening. Can you just explore that a bit more deeply and give us some, you've got some examples, I think, from your work about firms that have done this well and other firms that struggle to cope, I guess, with the pace of the change. Is that possible?
Yes. In the Makers project that we've just finished, we looked at what enables small and medium-sized enterprises to adopt new technologies. And what we kind of came up with is this idea that firms really are resisting the change. So there are some kind of stranded firms that cannot really, they don't have sufficient knowledge, capabilities, risk-loving approach to really explore the change. And the problem with these firms is that it depends how many you have in an economy. It's very important to try to reduce that number because they will be inevitably become obsolete very quickly. Then there are the early adopters and the advanced adopters. And of course, then you've got the leaders like Siemens and so on. I've done this in particular myself in Sweden. I was there for quite a long time and doing a visiting. And you got the ABB that they're really pushing the adoption through their supply chain. And that's where the idea of understanding the change in the supply chain is important, because if the big companies, again, I study ABB in particular, they make robots, automation, they're really big in automation. They were trying to almost educate their suppliers, in particular those located in Europe, even in Sweden, and of course those further afield. But their role of the buyers is crucial, because by working with their supplier, they reduce the risk of suppliers in terms of making the change. And so these big buyers are playing an important role. At the same time, and this is where the Catapult, I think, are crucial, what I saw in Sweden is the importance of having these technological, somehow hotspots, whereby they're not physically located because they're national initiatives, but they are technologically defined. And then what they do, they're trying to it's like almost a matrix. They're trying to intersect with regions, with industries located in particular places, to help them understand what are these technologies, where can I use augmented reality. You mentioned, Jessica mentioned, medical, lots of other applications. But in a sense, those applications will emerge only when firms understand how to apply them. But so there is it's a two-way system, is informing and be happy to be informed. And what we find in Sweden is that they have a very active policy, industrial innovation policy, but they were working on the regional level with clusters of firms, for example, in automation, medical devices. For example, they have mining, of course, they have logging, they have all sorts of paper, big paper industry, which they're trying to completely transform. So you've got these local clusters, industries in a sense of specialized in particular sectors, and they work with technologies. And I think the role of the catapults here are absolutely crucial in somehow ensuring this link between firms in industries and what the technologies can do for them. And this is, in my view, it has to be a game changer. One last point, I think we mentioned test beds and demonstrators. This is where the national level is important, because I think local localities cannot all of a sudden build a demonstrator or set up a test bed. So the importance at this point in time, because of the technological change, the importance of the national level technological policy is as important as the local level implementation of innovation policies, which I think they are in a sense the two sides of the same coin.
Lisa, thank you. That's super. And there needs to be some level of customization to the local endowments and potential of growth, but actually there needs to be a tone setting and a financial incentives, I guess, at the national level. These international comparisons, by the way, are superb. I mean, it's really insightful. And I think we'll try and bring in a minute Tassos and Bruce Tether on regional differences, city differences. But I'm going to go to David Furmage just quickly because he's got a comment on and a question on that theme.
Quick question, yes. I'm just wondering how we can best leverage our major events, 5G, and the actual legacy from them to help grow Createch. Because obviously it's a moment in time when the world will be on us. How do we capitalize this the best? Question for Jessica and indeed, Lisa.
Gosh, I think legacy, that's always a difficult one, isn't it? And I think that it's very difficult to find things after they've gone. And I think that that's something that we need to address, especially with anything immersive. You know, file types change and things disappear. Working on the Immersive Arcade has been an incredibly instructive experience, and immersive technology isn't really that old. You know, so how do you do legacy things, and how do you showcase in an environment that's hybrid like now? How do we bring in, you know, internationalize to see the work that we've done here in the UK and indeed compare it, like Lisa was talking just now? Yes, I'm afraid I don't know the best answer to that. It's probably a combination, and people such as on the call today putting their heads together to think about how we might best do that. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks.
The only thing I've seen in other countries, for example, say in Sweden, but also in the US, and then we had examples in Italy and in Spain, we saw that really different agencies, because every country has their own institutions, but the big effort they made to raise awareness. The first stage of adoption is being aware of what's going on. So for even a workshop where they're representing, literally showing firms what is those goggles for augmented reality. They may not have even never seen them. So even because, you know, probably young people might have experienced that, but if you're a businessman probably in your 40s or 50s, you might not have seen that. So I think there are generations which will make a difference, but they are not as engaged with new technologies, and maybe the younger generation who are for a completely different reason. So these technologies are not just simply for gaming, but they're becoming fundamentally important. So I think the first step is to really create opportunities, events, and this is where the demonstrators are important. They could be big and small. You have to think about different sizes for different technologies, and the test beds, because businesses need to really almost explore and touch with their bare hands what these technologies are, to understand how to adopt them. And I think the first step, as I said, just to repeat, the first step of adopting is being aware of what difference it can make.
Thank you. That's good answers.
Yeah, no, really true. Thanks. So there's a kind of longitudinal dimension here and a generation shift, and there's a spatial dimension. So I'm going to bring in Bruce Tether. We've got a few more minutes. Bruce is a longtime colleague of mine, actually, but is also part of the leadership of the Nesta PEC network, and he's based at University of Manchester. Bruce, sorry to haul you in, but I'd love to hear from you, and if you can stretch to trying to point to some of the differences between Manchester, Birmingham, or the regions, that would be great. And then I'll move on to Tassos after you. I think you should be able to speak.
Hopefully. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay, good. Yeah, so, I mean, fascinating, frankly. My shame, I don't know enough, I think, about creative tech. So it's very interesting. I mean, I think we are very interested also from a Manchester. I kind of wear two hats on this. One is from a Manchester perspective, and, you know, what do we have here? I'm probably rather ignorant of that. So I think you guys have got the head start on us. I think my wider issue is one of, it'd be great if these technologies weren't so London and Southeast centric, and how do we achieve that? And I think to a certain extent, what we do tend to do is we do look a lot at the supply side, always look at the supply side issues, right? But I always think, what about the demand side issues? How can we understand? I think a lot of the reasons why these things do get concentrated in London is partly the demand side reasons, and also those institutions which bring things to market. I mean, it's not really Createch, but if you think about, you know, the publishers of the big publishers of music, or big publishers of books and stuff, and, you know, it's all down there. So how do we move those enablers? How do we get those enablers into the West Midlands, Manchester City region, and the rest of the North? I think that would be great questions. And how do we shift demand? How do we make sure the buyers of Createch are also coming from outside of London and the Southeast too? But I think it's fascinating. So thanks a lot for organizing this event. It's been very interesting.
Thanks for being with us, Bruce. No, super questions, actually. I mean, once the gravitational pull is established of a city the scale of London, and we know how much VC capital and so much innovation is done there, it's quite difficult to pull parts of the system to other places. But I think it's happening, actually. Almost the last word before I wrap up goes to Tassos. Over to you, Tassos.
Oh, thank you very much. Just to add a little bit of perspective around the legacy, we've done a piece of work on places that had more engagement with the digital economy, and that's a number of web pages back in 2000. That's the year where Nokia 3310 was invented. It was state of the art. So having a web page was a big thing. So we found that the difference in regions in this engagement with the digital economy affects or is related to productivity differences up to 2017, and that's when our data ended. So it's very crucial, the early engagement, both with Createch in this case, but in general with the digital world, makes a whole host of difference, because we also tested for the digital engagement in 2004, 6, 7, 8, and so on, and these effects seem to diminish. So by the time a new technology has become established, the bonus for different areas seems to be going down. So it's all the more important to pick up the aspects we can build on around Createch to improve, to establish the region as a major player in this early on.
Tassos, thank you very much. So huge path dependency, but I think real opportunities for regions like ours to get in at the sort of starting point of some of these emerging technologies. And I think a lot of effort and a coordinated consensus is needed to do that. So time's up. That was fantastic. I really appreciate everybody's time. And I do want to thank our panelists, Jessica, David, and Lisa, and in particular, George, who's gone, but thanks to him as well, but also Tassos for both speaking and for organising this, and the team, Stuart and Matt behind him. So thanks also to all the participants. If you want to get the slides, do email Tassos or connect with City-REDI. I think most of the presenters are happy to let their slides out, and we've got other reports and materials for you and can link you up with the speakers. So do get in touch with us. Thank you very much for everybody. Great event, really interesting, and a good way to sort of start the end of the week, as it were. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye all.
Good rest of your day.
Bye.
Yeah, good.